Okay, Matt here. Good morning. Second Thessalonians today. Exciting. We made it through First Thessalonians. We saw for the first three chapters there's this tension. Paul doesn't know what's happening in the church of Thessalonica, and the Thessalonians, they don't know what happened to Paul. Where's he? Where's our big brother? And they're enduring afflictions, and all this stuff is going on. They have unanswered questions. And finally, in chapter 3, Paul finds out from Timothy that they're doing good. He gets into the didactic portion of his letter in chapter 4. Abstain from sexual immorality. Watch how you're walking. Walk worthy of the Lord. Don't worry about when God's coming. Just be ready. He's going to come like a thief in the night. So we get into Second Thessalonians here, and Paul, again, this is most likely written right after First Thessalonians. And Paul has an interesting way here of greeting them this time. He says Paul, Silvanus, and Timothy. He includes his two missionary brothers with him. And again, he leaves out the title apostle. Not that Paul's not an apostle, but again, he's not writing this to refute false teaching, which sadly is almost a rare thing. As soon as a church is set up, the enemy is there to tear it apart. The enemy will try to come from within in the form of apostate believers, pretend believers, from without, from the front, from the back, from the side. But Paul doesn't have to do that. So Paul is more writing as Big Brother Paul to encourage them. And he does that in the very next verse. So he says, Paul, Silvanus, and Timothy to the church of the Thessalonians in God our Father and Lord Jesus Christ. Verse 2, this is his encouragement right out of the chute. Grace to you and peace from God our Father and from the Lord Jesus Christ. Now this is a verse that I would be prone to fly by if I was where I was a couple of years ago. The grace to you and peace from God our Father and Lord Jesus Christ. Yeah, okay, that's great. Where's the teaching? That's where the teaching begins, right? That's a big deal. Paul is a giant. He's a spiritual giant. By the choosing of Jesus Christ. But Paul's not giving them his grace and peace here. What did they need? They needed grace and peace, right? They're getting persecuted. We're going to get into that in a little bit. But Paul says, grace and peace to you from God our Father and from the Lord Jesus Christ. That's powerful. Meditate on that. You want to pray for somebody, pray grace and peace over them from God the Father and from the Lord Jesus Christ. That's a powerful prayer. Okay, let's move on to verse 3. We ought always to give thanks to God for you, brothers, as it is right. I love that. Brothers, as it is right, because your faith is growing abundantly, and the love of every one of you for one another is increasing. Paul is so thankful. He's so grateful. He's got this church that God allowed him to set up. To God be the glory, and he says, we have to give thanks to God for you, brothers, as it is right. Two things here. He calls them brothers. That's a very important thing. That's an encouragement in and of itself. When they get this, that isn't a light term. They get this and they say, oh, yeah, we're his brothers. That's right. We're saved by the same Spirit Paul was saved by. We are in the same family as Paul. And it's right. It's right to give thanks to God in all things. We saw that at the end of 1 Thessalonians 5. Pray without ceasing. Give thanks always. So Paul says, as it is right, because, why? What are they thankful for? Because your faith is growing abundantly. And the love of every one of you for one another is increasing. What's a church that's born again? What's an alive church? What's a spiritually maturing, I should say, church gonna do? They're gonna grow abundantly in their faith. And they're gonna increase for their love of one another. So how are we doing? Paul mentions the term in 1 Thessalonians a couple of times, increase and abound, increase and abound. And I gave an analogy of a flower. That was just kind of, you could use whatever analogy you want, but it's increasing, and as it grows, it's abounding. Or a tree, maybe better. It's increasing and abounding. That's what we're supposed to be doing. How are we doing? If we were to take our temperature, how are we doing? And would the person who brought us to the Lord be thanking God? God saves us, don't get me wrong, but the person that shared the gospel to you, maybe it was many people, but let's just pretend it was one and God really clubbed you and pulled you in and got a hold of you. Would that person be thanking God for your faith? Is the person who led me to Jesus Christ, is he thanking God because of my abundantly growing faith and my increasing in love for one another? That this is more for the church now. I want to read one more verse, kind of ties in here. Verse 4, therefore we ourselves boast about you in the churches of God for your steadfastness and faith in all your persecutions and afflictions that you are enduring. Wow. We're going to get into the persecutions and afflictions tomorrow, but this kind of ties into the previous verse. I want us to think about something. Is the person that was a big impact on us to leading us to Jesus Christ, again, to God be the glory, but the instrument that God used, would that person, maybe somebody who discipled us, would that person boast about us to other churches, to other Christians? If that person sees us suffering, a lot of us are suffering. We're going through some type of tribulation. We don't know. I would say it doesn't compare to those in Haiti. It doesn't compare to those in other countries. Talking about Christians, not just anybody under some type of affliction like a tornado. I'm talking about Christians being afflicted, caught in affliction. But for those of us who are going through the desert and going through tough times, are we giving thanks always? Are we praising God right in the middle of the storm? Would the person that discipled us or led us to Jesus Christ, if you could use that term, would they be bragging to other people? Would they say, oh, John Jones, man, he was in the ditch and God got a hold of him. Now I brag about him because he's got this steadfastness of hope and his faith is increasing and he's loving all the church and he's growing. That's a challenge for us today. That's a challenge for me today. That's as far as we're going to go today. Grace and peace to you in Lord Jesus Christ. Have a good day.